1 in 3 adults has this condition right now, and most people have no idea. It's not because it's rare, it's because the standard tests your doctor runs don't pick it up. Things like glucose, A1C, can often miss this for a decade, and by the time these tests come back in the red, the damage is already done. We're talking about insulin resistance, and it's the single most important metabolic concept with modern health. It's the hidden driver behind conditions like type 2 diabetes, fatty liver, heart disease, PCOS, and researchers are now calling Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes because of how this condition starves the brain of energy. Today I'm going to show you how to tell if you have it, why your labs might be lying to you, and the exact steps you need to do to reverse it before it progresses. I'm Michael Smith, a naturopathic doctor. In this video I'm going to go into exactly what insulin resistance is, how it develops, and how to know if you even have it. And most importantly, how to fix it if you do. Because this is one of the most reversible conditions I see in practice, especially when you catch it early. So to understand insulin resistance, first you need to understand what insulin is supposed to do. Think of insulin as a delivery driver. Its job is to unlock your cells and drop off glucose for energy. But with constant sugar spikes, the locks on your cells get jammed. Your pancreas responds by screaming louder, make more insulin. And this is to force that door open. Your blood sugar can look normal on a test, but only because your insulin levels are hitting the red zone behind the scenes. Well, insulin also plays a direct role in fat metabolism. When insulin is elevated, your body is in storage mode. It is actively storing energy, and this means you cannot effectively burn fat for energy. It's only when the pancreas can no longer keep up that the blood sugar finally starts to rise, and that's when you're told that you have pre-diabetes. By that point, the problem has usually been developing for at least a decade. Insulin resistance doesn't happen overnight. It builds gradually, usually over years, sometimes decades. It comes from a combination of factors layering on top of each other. The primary driver is chronic carbohydrate excess, particularly refined carbohydrates and added sugars. Every time you eat carbohydrates or drink carbohydrates in soft drinks and sugary drinks, insulin goes up, and that's normal. The problem is the frequency and the quantity. When you're spiking insulin multiple times every day, day after day for years, with highly refined foods, that causes rapid steep rises and the cells start to become desensitized to the insulin. Fructose deserves a special mention, specifically liquid fructose, and sugar is half glucose and half fructose. And this is in soda, fruit juice, energy drinks, sweetened coffees, and fructose is almost exclusively processed by the liver. And when you drink large amounts of it, it overwhelms the liver and gets converted directly into fat. This fat accumulation in the liver is one of the first places that insulin resistance takes hold. Then there's visceral fat, the fat stored around your organs rather than under your skin. This type of fat actively releases inflammatory signals that interfere with insulin signaling. Physical inactivity compounds the problem because muscle is the largest site for disposing of glucose. Chronic stress and poor sleep are two things that many people don't connect to insulin resistance, but they are equally as important as diet, and I'll talk more about this later. One of the reasons that insulin resistance can go undetected for years is because it's silent. But your body's always leaving clues. Watch out for that post-lunch coma where you can't keep your eyes open and tired. Constant cravings even after eating. That stubborn belly fat that just won't move. And for women, irregular cycles or PCOS are signs of insulin resistance. If your glucose is normal and you have these signs, it shows your system is struggling. Elevated triglycerides on your blood test or low HDL, they're some of the first metabolic signs that may show up on a standard lab test. In women, PCOS is very commonly driven by insulin resistance. Insulin in excess promotes androgen production, which disrupts the hormonal cycle, and addressing insulin resistance is one of the most effective approaches for addressing PCOS. And brain fog, particularly that mid-afternoon mental fatigue that makes it hard to focus. If you've had blood tests come back and everything looks normal, but you're experiencing these symptoms, it's worth looking into this in a bit more detail. The most direct consequence of insulin resistance is type 2 diabetes. When the pancreas has been compensating for long enough, the insulin-producing cells start to wear out. Heart disease is another consequence. Insulin resistance promotes high triglycerides, low HDL, and an increase in the small, dense LDL particles. It also drives arterial inflammation and higher blood pressure. In other words, insulin resistance directly creates the conditions for cardiovascular disease. Fatty liver is also entwined with insulin resistance, and they're often basically the same problem. Then there's the brain. There is growing evidence showing that the brain becomes insulin resistant. When brain cells become insulin resistant, they lose their ability to effectively use glucose. This leads to impaired cognition, memory, and neurodegeneration over time. The things you're doing in your 30s and 40s are laying the groundwork for your cognitive health in your 60s and 70s. The good news is that insulin resistance is one of the most reversible conditions I know, and the sooner you catch it, the better. The test you need to ask your doctor for specifically is fasting insulin. Fasting insulin itself ideally should be below 8 to 10. Many labs don't flag it as abnormal until it's up around 25 or higher, and the ideal range is around 3 to 6. Let me know in the comments if you've had your fasting insulin tested, or if you've struggled to convince your doctor to run this test. And reversing insulin resistance doesn't always require a strict low-carb diet. It requires a lower insulin diet, and those aren't quite the same thing. Refined carbohydrates like white bread, white rice, pastries, most breakfast cereals cause rapid, steep blood sugar spikes. The pancreas has to release large amounts of insulin quickly, and doing that multiple times a day, day after day. And that's how insulin resistance develops. Whole food carbohydrates like legumes, vegetables, oats, sweet potatoes, resistant starch from cooked and cooled potatoes, fruits in moderation release glucose more slowly because of their fiber and water content. The insulin response is measured and gradual, and that's a different signal to your cells. And the single most impactful dietary change you can make is to remove liquid sugar entirely. Whole fruit is generally fine because the fiber changes everything. It slows down the absorption and reduces the insulin response, and your liver can handle a little bit of fructose. Protein and fat don't spike insulin the way refined carbohydrates do, so having adequate protein to maintain muscle mass is one of the most powerful ways you can improve glucose disposal. Exercise is another underrated tool to help reverse insulin resistance. And the reason comes back to muscle again. Your skeletal muscle is the body's largest site for glucose disposal. When muscle cells are working, they absorb glucose from the bloodstream and use it for energy. And muscle contraction can pull glucose into the cells through a mechanism that is independent of insulin. And here's what makes this interesting. Muscle contraction can pull glucose into cells through a mechanism that is partially independent of insulin. So when you exercise, muscle cells increase GLUT4 transporters on the surface, essentially opening more doors for glucose to enter, even when your insulin sensitivity is impaired. Muscles like your metabolic sponge. When you move, your muscles can actually pull sugar out of the blood without needing that signal from insulin. This is why a 10-minute walk after a big meal or doing some squats or some other type of exercise can help reverse insulin resistance and help with glucose disposal. And while cardiovascular training is important, resistance training is super important for insulin resistance. And on the flip side, prolonged sitting worsens insulin sensitivity. Even if you exercise in the morning and then spend the next 8 hours sitting, that offsets the benefits. You need to get up and exercise for a couple of minutes every hour. You don't have to do much. You could just be going for a walk while you're on the phone. It could be a couple of squats, just something to get the body moving. Poor sleep is another way to drive insulin resistance. A single night of poor sleep, 4 to 5 hours, can reduce insulin sensitivity the following day. Not weeks of sleep deprivation, one night. Poor sleep raises a hormone called ghrelin, which is your hunger hormone. That reduces leptin, your satiety hormone. So when you're sleep deprived, not only does it impair insulin sensitivity, but it makes you hungrier and choose poor choices the next day. Chronic stress follows a similar pattern. Cortisol is a glucocorticoid. Its job in acute stress is to raise blood sugar so your muscles have fuel. And that's a brilliant short-term mechanism, but when you're under chronic stress and having chronically elevated cortisol, the blood sugar levels and insulin is constantly elevated. So you can eat the perfect diet, exercise consistently, but if you're chronically sleep deprived and very stressed, it's going to make a significant impact on your insulin and potentially lead to insulin resistance. And there's some supplements out there that can help, but they're not magic potions. The most important thing to focus on is diet, sleep, and stress, plus exercise. Supplements may help, but you want to implement those 4 things before you start taking any supplements. Some of the supplements that have been shown to help are things like berberine. It works by activating an enzyme called AMPK, the same mechanism that activates the diabetes drug metformin. And multiple studies have shown that berberine helps with insulin resistance comparable to metformin. Magnesium deficiency directly impairs insulin signaling. Alpha-lipoic acid improves the ability of the insulin-sensitive cells to take up glucose. It's particularly helpful if you have a lot of oxidative stress. Chromium enhances the sensitivity of the insulin receptor, and the most studied form is chromium picolinate. Inositol is particularly helpful for anyone with PCOS, and this helps with reducing fasting insulin, and it can even improve sleep quality, because that's another mechanism that can help with insulin levels. If you're deficient in vitamin D, that's another thing that can affect insulin sensitivity. Intermittent fasting is one of the most effective tools I know for resetting the insulin sensitivity. And the mechanism is fairly straightforward. When you're not eating, insulin drops, and sustained low insulin over several hours allows the cells to gradually resensitize to the hormone. It also switches the body from a glucose burning mode to a fat burning mode, which is something that chronically elevated insulin prevents. The most practical approach for most people is that 16-8 protocol, eating within an 8-hour window, and then fasting from, say, 6 p.m. to 10 a.m. the next day. It makes it easier because a lot of the time fasting is when you're asleep. Intermittent fasting is not for everybody. You can't do it if you're pregnant or breastfeeding, if you have a history of disordered eating, and if you're already under a lot of stress. You don't want to start with fasting. You want to address those things first before you implement intermittent fasting. Fasting itself is a mild stressor on the body. So I focus on treating things before they became a major problem. So that's why checking your insulin levels, making the changes to your diet, sleep, stress levels, exercise can help to prevent diabetes developing in the future. With medicine, there's what I call upstream medicine, which is prevention, and downstream medicine, where things have gone too far. Everything I've covered in this video, the diet, the movement, sleep, reducing stress, supplements, intermittent fasting, they're all upstream interventions to help prevent and treat diabetes and insulin resistance. They're addressing the root cause and not just taking a medication to mask the symptoms. But if insulin resistance is ignored for a long time, the pancreatic cells are significantly depleted, and sometimes diet and lifestyle changes alone may not be enough. This is where diabetes medication, and in some advanced cases, insulin itself may be necessary. It doesn't mean that you stop addressing the root cause, because you may be able to get off those medications eventually. But for some people, they need both to get back into balance. So here's a quick step-by-step summary. Step 1, get your insulin levels checked when next time you have a blood test. Also look at A1C, glucose, and the triglyceride to HDL ratio. Step 2 is to remove liquid sugar. That's sodas, fruit juice, sweetened coffee, energy drinks. That's the single thing that can change things quite dramatically, even within 6 weeks. Step 3 is make sure you do movement after your biggest meal today, or even all your meals. Even a 10-minute walk or air squats is great. Step 4 is focus on sleep, 7 to 8 hours a day. And if something's chronically disrupting your sleep, you need to address that. Step 5 is work with a practitioner to help you navigate this. Someone who knows how to utilize the nutrients, the dietary and lifestyle changes, and understand your test results so you can be proactive. So insulin resistance is a signal your body is under strain, and the body has an extraordinary way of healing given the right conditions. If you have any questions, leave a comment below, and if you're struggling to get your doctor to test insulin, I'll leave some links in the description where you can get testing done through Planet Naturopath.